So what happens when you take two people with different personalities, different social classes, put them in a car or a train or a plane and go across country? Can they survive?
Road trip.
All right, so real quick, we are going to do a little discussion on the 1987 John Hughes movie, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Some would call it a John Hughes classic.
I think it is a classic. It has somewhat become kind of a Thanksgiving tradition that they played around that time. You got two guys. Steve Martin plays Neil Page. He's an advertising executive. He's trying to get back to Chicago for Thanksgiving. He runs into Del Griffith, played by John Candy, who is a traveling shower curtain ring salesman, kind of a slob, likes to talk, and Neil Page is very introverted, a little uptight, and they end up getting on a plane from New York to Wichita, Kansas, Nathan. And from there, they have to take a bus and a train, and they ride in the back of a semi truck with frozen food, and they rent a car that blows up, and everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong with these two. And the whole time, it's just a completely, it's just a clash of class, status, and personalities in this film. So, Doug, I know you've seen this movie.
A couple times.
Nathan says he has not seen this movie.
Yeah.
Again?
I've only seen a clip that you sent me on YouTube.
Just a clip. And
yeah, let's not talk about that clip.
Yeah. But I mean, this film is, first of all, I mean, it is a comedy and it is really funny, but there is a deeper message and meaning in this movie. As I mentioned, Steve Martin's character, if anything, he's a straight man in this one. He's more serious. He's very uptight. He's very neat. And Del Griffith, played by John Candy, is an absolute slob. And, talks to everybody, talks about everything, tells all these little stories, and it just drives Steve Martin crazy. He can't handle it. He just wants to be left alone. And so there's bickering and there's fighting throughout this whole film. And they go back and forth and insult one another about, you're a slob and you're this. And it's like, I think at one point, Steve Martin says hanging out with Del Griffith is like going on a date with a Chatty Cathy doll where you pull the string and it snaps. It's just non-stop with you. So, but eventually they end up reaching Chicago, and at the end of this film, spoiler alert, but if you haven't seen it, you find out at the end, Del Griffith is talking about his wife, and he's mentioned that he hasn't been home in years. And when they get to Chicago and Steve Martin leaves him, he starts thinking about this trip that they've been on, and he starts actually laughing about some of the things that had happened to him. And then he remembers something that Del said, that he said he hasn't been home in years. So he goes back to the train station, and there's Del sitting there on the bench by himself, and he says, "Why aren't you going home?" And he says, "Well, I don't have a home. My wife passed away years ago. He lives on the road." So Steve Martin eventually just invites him to his house for Thanksgiving. They walk up with the trunk, they enter the house. Steve Martin sees his wife, and he says, "I want to introduce you to my friend Del." And that's how the movie ends. So at the end of this film, they're actually can see past their differences and become friends. And I think it's a really interesting message, and it's a really, I don't know, it's just a really good story at the end. I mean, it's a lot of humor in it, but deep down, it's got a really good story in it. So when I watch this
catalyst,
I'm sorry?
Like, for them to connect, what was it? Just empathy over what he'd gone through? Or what particularly was the catalyst to help them overcome their differences?
I think it has a little bit to do with, I think Steve Martin's character, Neil, eventually loosens up a little bit on the road. I think he realizes he doesn't have to be so stuffy. Things happen. Accidents happen. Mistakes happen. And you've got to learn how to just sometimes go with it, And that's the message that John Candy's character has said this entire film. Just, hey, man, it's okay. We'll figure this out. You know, you just got to go with the flow. Things happen and you just go with it. And I think eventually Neil sees Del as this just such a free spirit and nothing bothers him. And I think deep down, that's what he wants to be. I think he's like, you know, I'd like to be like this guy. Why do I have to be so serious all the time? Why do I have to get upset and get angry over some of these little things? Just look past it. And I mean, and halfway through during the film, after their car blows up, Steve Martin's character actually starts laughing about it. He's giggling and he's making jokes about it, you know, like, you know, you finally did this to yourself. Like, you didn't do it to me, you did it to you. And they're having these little jokes. And then, you know, then he realizes that his wallet was in the car and now he has no money. But I think it's just that the character and the personality of Del rubs off on Neil. And he sees a different way of looking at things. So, you know, when I watch this show, I look at these characters and I can see myself in both. Because I don't have a stranger. I don't know a stranger. I will talk to everybody and anybody about anything. It drives my wife crazy. I mean, if I'm wearing a University of Illinois shirt, if I'm walking around the mall and I see somebody else with an Illini shirt, it's, hey, go Illini. You know, we'll sit and talk. And my wife's like, how do you do that? I'm like, I don't know. I enjoy talking with people. But at the other hand, I can see myself and Neil also, because I can get stressed out about little things and I can panic and I can worry and I can, you know, I don't like clutter. And if things are too messy, I'll start to freak out. Like, why are there socks in the floor? And why aren't we? So I wish I could be more like Del all the time than have this other one, because he knows how to just let things bounce off of him. And one thing that he says to Neil when they're in this hotel room, they had to share a bed. And Del's got beer on the bed and he's putting the coins in the vibrating bed while the beer explodes. So Neil's telling Del, it's like, you know, thanks to you, I've got to sleep in a puddle of beer because you didn't realize that the beer cans were going to explode. And he starts going on about how, you know, you smoke, you drink, you do this, you smell bad, your feet are horrible, you're this, and you talk and talk. And Del looks at Neil and he says, do you want to hurt me? Because if it makes you feel better, go right ahead. I'm an easy target. You know, he's like, I talk too much, but I also listen too much. You know, I could be a cold-hearted cynic like you, but, you know, I like people and my customers like me. My friends like me. My wife likes me. And I'm not changing. What you see is what you get. And this is it. So if you want to be your way, that's fine. But I'm comfortable with who I am. And I'm not changing. So, I mean, then I think that kind of starts hitting Neil a little bit like, okay, maybe I am too rough on this guy.
And two, I mean, you know, you were asking about how they could have come together after all that. I mean, when you go through war, you come out as brothers. And, you know, I mean, obviously, I'm not comparing that movie to War, and I'm not comparing what I'm about to say to War by any means. But, you know, in the same situation, the first time me and some of my friends went to Groundhog's Day in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. And, you know, you're kind of expecting, I mean, we knew it wasn't going to be exactly like the movie, but we were expecting something a little bit more. And it was not good. You know, we stood out in 10-degree weather for like 7 hours in the middle of the woods waiting for them to pull this rat out of a tree trunk. And, you know, and there was nowhere to eat and there was nothing to do. And, you know, it was, but by the end of it, we were laughing so hard and telling these stories about all this stuff we went through that we all just were much closer even after that. So I could totally see just going through that hell the entire time and coming out the other side. And it's like, we succeeded. Hey, remember when? And, you know, you can sit there and joke about it.
Yeah. You got punked.
Yep.
Hey, you said this movie takes place in Wichita too, right?
There is a part. Yeah, they're supposed to fly into Chicago, but O'Hare is snowed in because back in the 80s we had snow at Thanksgiving, apparently. I can't remember ever having snow on Thanksgiving.
Oh yeah, dude.
I don't. I hardly ever remember that. But anyway, they had so much snow that they couldn't land in O'Hare, so they had to fly to Wichita. And they land in the airport. And of course, all the hotels are booked. And Neil calls his wife first, and Del is smart enough to call his buddy at this little rundown hotel. But some of it is at the Wichita airport.
I've actually been there, so yeah, I was wondering about that because their airport, when I moved here, it's been almost 10 years now. Their airport was very small, and now it's nice and it's bigger. But at the time, I flew to North Carolina out of here, and I went through their security section, and you ever seen like the short at the grocery line, right? There's the automated ones, and there's the little short conveyor belt that's like 2 feet long. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That was like their security area. There was like one of those stations, and that was it. There were no big maze-like lines that you went through. There was this one little stop in a hallway, and like this conveyor belt that's 2 feet long that you put your suitcase on, and they check it for suspicious materials. And someone in front of me had a bag that had gunpowder on it, and so there was a holdup. And then the next time I went through that airport, they'd redone it and it had real security. But I thought that was interesting. Like, oh, they're flying to this like little rinky-dink airport. And I also think it's interesting how somehow Wichita, this small little city, makes its way into quite a bit of pop culture. I don't know what it is, but it's in that White Stripes song, Seven Nation Army. I'm going to Wichita. There's other songs about it. So I just thought, wow, how did they pick here of all places?
Yeah. Well,
why did they go to Wichita?
Because they couldn't land in Chicago, so
yeah,
they
I
had
get
to land
that.
somewhere
But
else.
why not Louisville?
Way out here, yeah.
Because
why not Kansas City?
That's how weather works, though. The weather comes through Kansas and then comes up to Illinois.
I guess
So they would have been in the middle of the storm, or at least
the storm was past, and that's the
by it.
only place they could land.
Is it supposed to be like
somewhere
a knock
warm at least?
on Wichita? Like, oh, you couldn't go to where you were supposed to go. You had to go to this teeny little place.
Well, I also think they had to put them somewhere far enough away where they could have all this other
makes
stuff.
sense.
They landed in Louisville, their home, same day.
Okay.
So anyway, this interesting fact here. This is a John Hughes film. John Hughes is known for doing lots of movies, obviously, and all of his movies take place in Chicago. So this movie is tied in to two other John Hughes films. And Doug, you want to go ahead and explain?
It's actually something I didn't realize until I was much older, because I hadn't seen this other movie until I was older. About the same time Planes, Trains, and Automobiles came out, there was a movie starring Kevin Bacon called She's Having a Baby. Now, in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, there's a scene where Steve Martin is trying to flag down a cab. He sees the cab. He looks across the street, and there's Kevin Bacon standing there. Now, as a kid, I was sitting there. I was like, huh, Kevin Bacon's in this movie too?
Yeah.
And the two of them go running down each side of the street, dodging people and everything to get to this one cab. And Steve Martin trips over a big trunk on the sidewalk, and that's John Candy's trunk, and that's how they meet. But anyway, because of that, Kevin Bacon gets the cab. He slaps top of the cab, gives a salute, gets in, they drive away. Well, I'm watching, this is like 15 years later, I'm watching She's Having a Baby, and Kevin Bacon's waving down a cab, and then he looks over, and Steve Martin's on the other side of the road. I'm like, oh, I get it now. They actually played off, took these two movies, and like they're both happening at the same time, and it just happened to be in the same place. This one, 30-second, 45-second time period, they're in the same place. And I thought that was kind of cool when you find that out much later.
Yeah. So it also ties into The Great Outdoors. Well, actually, it ties into a few other movies, because at the end credits of She's Having a Baby, they're trying to decide what to name this kid. So while the credits are rolling, all these characters from John Hughes movies show up. John Candy shows up as Chet Ripley from The Great Outdoors, which came out the year after Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and She's Having a Baby. Dan Aykroyd shows up as his character from The Great Outdoors. Matthew Broderick shows up as Ferris Bueller. And a couple other guys from John Hughes films show up to give out names of the baby. So it's like he incorporated his entire, it's like Kevin Smith puts all the same characters in these movies.
Yeah.
John Hughes kind of did that with She's Having a Baby. She's got all these characters in there. So
Oh, that is cool. That is
Pretty
so
neat.
cool.
Yeah.
But I think that's awesome that he made 2 movies and used the same scene in both movies just from different perspectives. Like that's like bordering the realm of genius right there. So
You also said that it took about 85 days to shoot this film, right?
85
Writing
days.
it?
Yeah, they shot in New York and they shot in St. Louis, and they actually shot some of the traveling scenes in Illinois. The Braidwood Inn, where they spend their first night, and they have to share the bed, is actually in Braidwood, Illinois. There is a hotel right off the interstate, Interstate 55, I think it is. And I've been outside of it before because a friend of mine in college grew up in that area, and I was talking about that movie. And she said, yeah, the Braidwood Inn's a real place. It's right down, like, just down the street, down the interstate from my hometown. So we got in the car one Saturday and drove up, and sure enough, there's the Braidwood Inn. I'm like, oh, it's so cool. But yeah, 85 days because John Hughes kept rewriting the script, and they kept just filming stuff. And the actual first cut of this movie ran 3 hours and 45 minutes.
Wow, that is a long comedy.
So they had to cut a lot of stuff
Like
out.
Lord of the Rings long.
That would
Yeah,
have been a record probably for a comedy.
And there were no trees in that one.
yeah. There was, I guess there was subplots that they cut out and all that stuff too. But when you watch the show on TV, there's actually added scenes in the TV version, though. There's extra scenes on the airplane.
It's usually the other way around.
Yeah, but I've watched on TV and I'll see scenes on an airplane. It's like, I've never seen that before. What is this?
That's
So,
cool.
and there's an alternate take of Steve Martin at the rent-a-car desk.
Yes.
They have an alternate version of that too.
Because they
So,
can't air the original.
cannot
version.
air the original version.
Yeah.
19
Ironically.
big ones dropped in that scene.
And that's the reason the movie is rated R.
That's it. So anyway, that's Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Nathan, I highly recommend you watch this.
Yes, I have a copy. I've had it.
It's a
for
very
15 years.
touching
I've
movie.
never
I mean,
Yes.
and first off, it is, you take 2 of the funniest people ever,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit behind Bill Murray, but still, and put them in a movie like this and just let them go. I mean, I would assume at some point John Hughes was probably just like, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
I mean, these 2 are just improv geniuses. So half that movie was probably made up on the spot, even though they rewrote it 17 times.
Yeah.
They're probably just making stuff up as they go too. So,
Oh yeah.
but it is very touching. There are some serious parts to it, and
Okay.
it is a great message. And happy ending. Cool. movie.
I
It's a lot of
usually
fun.
don't go to very many comedies, and I don't know why, because there's some that I really like. But I think, by explaining the deeper meaning of the film, that intrigues me enough that I actually kind of want to see it now. So
Yeah.
Right.
You'll enjoy it because it doesn't matter. Throw out the class, throw out the guy who's an executive to the salesman. Their personalities. Somebody who's like Neil Page. Somebody who is like Del Griffith. So you'll recognize these people and how they interact. And like I said, like when I watch it, I can see myself in both characters. And then it makes you wonder, like, God, am I really like that? Because I want to be more like that. So,
Mhm.
yeah, it's a good one. If you haven't seen it, watch it.
Absolutely.
So
Very
anyway,
good.
that's that one.
All
I
right.
guess stay tuned. We'll have some more of these. Nathan's got one he wants to talk about. Doug has one he's going to talk about, and we'll get that out here pretty soon. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll see you next time.
Peace.